Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Ryan, and let's take a look at some Lord of the Rings stuff. Over the weekend, the first trailer for Lord of the Rings of Power dropped, and I thought a fun introduction to the channel might be to cover some initial reactions to the trailer. Technically, this would be my second time watching the clip, but first time taking a closer look at it. I will also have an in-depth breakdown video coming soon, taking an even closer look at the trailer frame by frame to see what secrets we can uncover together. We're also going to go over two Variety Fair articles. One has a ton of behind-the-scenes info for Lord of the Rings of Power, and the other one is covering Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim anime, which was just announced by Warner Brothers coming in a few years. Let's get this video started with some initial reactions to the trailer. Okay. Yeah, I mean, sometimes. Oh, is that Valinor? Is that... Alright, so these are the people carrying the big elk horns. These are really cool. I don't know what they are or why, but they're there. That might be a hobbit or like a sylvan elf, I guess. Big waterfall. That's impressive. So this is the ice area, the Hexa whatever. The Galadriel climbing it. Very Game of Thrones vibes. Yo, I love the shot. What a good save. Okay, we got a shooting star, some elves, some horses. Is that, I don't know who that was, but big troll. Looks like a bunch of treasure. Malorn trees, a dwarf, this guy. More elf. Lots of fire, lots of war. Little hands, okay. Alright. Coming September 2nd. I think that's the first confirmed release date, but I don't really remember. Okay, so first kind of initial impressions. The city at the beginning, that might be Valinor, or maybe like Valmar, the kind of main city in Valinor. We know that Rings of Power will play a little bit with the timeline of events, kind of like how Peter Jackson did with Lord of the Rings films. So it could also be a flashback. There could also be a time skip, or like multiple time skips within the show, since it's supposed to take place over thousands of years. It would be very anime of them, but it would make sense to do that. We already kind of had that image of a person, possibly Galadriel, standing in front of the two trees, Lorien, the golden tree, and Telperion, the silver tree, which probably not pronounce it correctly. So I think it's a pretty good odds that's playing around with time here. Love the elk people. Maybe they're early humans. I don't really know why, but these guys are really neat and they stand out in comparison to everything else in the show. Because I think actually it's the thing that makes the least amount of sense. I also think it's really interesting to note that they didn't show Anatar in this little trailer. That's Sauron's elven form, at least as far as I can tell. Maybe I missed him or he's in the background or something, but I don't think they've shown him yet. My guess is they're going to wait a little bit before showing him, since we've yet to see Sauron's fair form on any type of film. Personally, I'd be really happy if they waited until the show drops to actually reveal him, so we can kind of experience it as the show releases, but it'll probably get revealed closer to that September release. Morfydd Clark is front and center as Galadriel in the trailer. There's quite a few shots of her doing stuff, even run away from like a troll or some type of a monster. I think that's her anyways. She's adrift at sea. She's maybe failed a crossing of the Great Sea. Not sure what's really happening there. She's climbing the big ice wall, which is possibly the grinding ice region of the name I definitely cannot pronounce. And that would come after the Oath of Feanor and the Kinslaying. And if that's the case, we could see like really big events go down in the early parts of the show. Or they do a lot of like playing with time skipping and flashbacks and all that jazz. There's also a lot of really cool dwarf scenes there at the end. I'm actually excited to see what Khazad-dûm's going to look like in its prime. Or I guess like maybe just in the early stages. And this is just a theory, but possibly the scene where the giant rock is being split, that could be them breaking the mold that the rings are forged in. It could also not be, because there's a lot of dwarves standing around them and they weren't really involved in the forging of the rings at all. But it could also be maybe the dwarves discovering Mithril, and that's what, you know, drives them to found Khazad-dûm. Going to take a closer look at that scene to be sure, and obviously we're not going to know until the show drops, but a lot of really cool things happen in there. All right, let's move on to the Vanity Fair article. They actually covered a lot of detail about the trailer and a lot of early information, including that is Galadriel adrift in the Sundering Sea, and she's with a mortal castaway named Halbrand, who is played by Charlie Vickers. Halbrand is a brand new character being introduced to the show, and he seems to be running from something from his past. The showrunners Patrick McKay and J.D. Payne revealed that the show will be covering the forging of the rings, and importantly, what the forgings of the rings did to each of the races who received them. The article also points out that Amazon doesn't actually have rights to certain characters like any of the hobbits or wizards, likely because, you know, they weren't really doing things in the Second Age, but they weren't included in the appendices and other texts that Amazon bought when they bought the film rights. Also, I think this is key that the Tolkien estate has had a pretty big input on the direction of the series, so they're going to have maybe a good idea on where to take things and what they can use. However, Hobbit ancestors, called the Harfoots, do make an appearance, specifically two played by Megan Richards and Markella Kavanagh, and they apparently will be encountering a man with a mysterious origin, but that article doesn't really say what else. First pass guesses could be anything from Tom Bombadil to possibly even Anatar. It's way too early to tell. A really neat quote from showrunner Patrick McKay seems to shut down concerns that the Rings of Power will be kinda Game of Thronesy. McKay says he wanted to, quote, make a show for everyone, for kids who are 11, 12, and 13, even though sometimes they may have to pull the blanket up over their eyes if it's a little too scary. We talked about the tone of Tolkien's books. This is material that is sometimes scary, and sometimes very intense, sometimes quite political, sometimes quite sophisticated, but it's also heartwarming and life-affirming and optimistic. It's about friendship, and it's about brotherhood and underdogs overcoming great darkness. There's tons of more information on the show and a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff in the full article, and I'll leave a link in the description below. And finally, there is the recent Variety article, which dropped a bunch of new information about the War of the Rohirrim anime coming from Warner Brothers. Set to release April 12th, 2024, the anime is set about 200 years before The Hobbit and will cover the travels of Helm Hammerhand, King of the Rohan, and namesake of Helm's Deep. Kenji Kamiyama, who famously directed Ghost in the Shell standalone complex and the recent Blade Runner Black Lotus animes, is directing and has been working on the film since it was announced back in June of 2021. So far, we only have one screenshot as our first look, but it appears to be a lot of Rohirrim standing off Horadrim, or maybe Easterlings, given the big old elephant there in the corner. But that's pretty much all we have right now. Other members of the creative team include Philippa Boyens, who was part of the screenwriting team for both Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies, Richard Taylor, who won multiple Oscars for makeup and visual effects on Lord of the Rings, Alan Lee, who won an Oscar for his art direction in Lord of the Rings, and the fantastic Tolkien illustrator John Howe. Not much else has been released about the anime, but given Kamiyama's history and Boyens and the rest of the team's experience working with the live-action films, it looks very promising. I'll drop a link to the full article in the description below, so make sure to check it out. And, while we're here, please subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content, not just about the upcoming show, but we're going to have lore videos, theory crafting, maybe even a few playthroughs of old Lord of the Rings games for people that are interested in that. Let me know what you'd like to see covered next, and thanks for watching Age of the Trees.